Hey, everybody. Welcome to Living Experiment Podcast, the COVID edition, where we come to you live on video instead of hiding out in the quiet studio where we typically are. You'll also know that today it's not just me and Dallas Hartwig. It's me, Pilar Gerasimo, with my good friend, psychotherapist, and author, Terri Cole, PhD. Hi, Terri.
Not PhD, master's.
Oh, sorry, master's. I keep telling people you're a PhD because to me, you seem like a doctor. You seem you know what you are talking. Terry's a psychotherapist and a practicing genius in the art of setting boundaries. And she has a new book out called Boundary Boss by Terri Cole. Yay, Terri.
Oh, thanks.
Congratulations. This is huge. This is your first book.
It is my first book.
I want to ask you how you got your stuff together to do this. It took me 5 years to write my book. How did this come out?
I wrote that book in 12 weeks. I did. But here's the thing. Let's be honest. Some people write a book early on in their career or in their expertise. I've been doing what I've been doing almost 25 years. Mm-hmm. So I built a public platform. I built a whole thing, and I was teaching these concepts in the book for about 5 years, perfecting, almost like beta testing it, of like what actually produces the results that we want in the most efficient, the most direct, small step way. So, it makes it sound like fancy. I did it in 12 weeks, but here's the thing. I'd literally been doing it for decades. So I already had a lot done before I actually turned it into a book.
One of those overnight successes that took a couple decades to produce.
Exactly.
I kind of feel that too, although mine is certainly not an overnight anything, but I do think it's helpful just in framing our conversation for people to understand the level of your expertise and your specialty in relationships generally is amazing. But this particular topic of boundaries is one that I think you've been cogitating on and teaching on for as long as I've known you. And it's really important stuff. I feel like in some ways it's the most basic elements of relationships. Like if you can't figure out where you begin and somebody else ends, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. So I know you've been talking a lot about this book because you just started your book tour or your virtual tour. I suppose everything is on Zoom now. Yep. Less fun maybe. But I want to talk to you in a more focused way about how boundaries relate to health and health seeking and health improvement and healthcare and health management. Because in the living experiment world, a lot of our emphasis is on rethinking your choices and then reclaiming your life. And I think we are always making choices about how to set boundaries, but unfortunately, a lot of them are unconscious, habituated choices based on our deep past, which is really how you open the book, is in talking about where did our current notion of boundaries come from and how do they carry forward into our future, our present and future life. Give us a kind of essential definition, if you will, just to most basic level, like what is a boundary and what are some different kinds of boundaries that often we don't maybe do or don't think of as we're considering boundaries?
Right. Well, the way that I describe it, because there's so many different ways, right? If, Brene Brown says, boundaries are letting the people in your life know what's okay with you and what's not okay with you, right? That's one simple knowing where Catherine Ann, is that her name? The one where I end and you begin, right? To me, that's also, especially that one is a little confusing. So I broke it down to actions, right? So it is basically us knowing our own preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers, and then having the capability of communicating them transparently, effectively, efficiently in our personal and professional relationships.
That's a very good definition and a very efficient one. I like that. So let's talk about it again. You said preferences, desires. What's the third one? Limits and deal breakers.
Like your non-negotiables.
Yeah. Okay. So an example of a preference would be as simple as I like it to be cool in the bedroom when I go to sleep, right? Yep. And give me an example of a desire.
That's something I think it's more powerful than a preference. It might be where you want to live, right? I have a desire to move, let's say, to the desert. Now, that's something that's going to require more conversation if you're in a relationship with someone. A desire is just stronger than a preference.
Got it. That's great. We often hear from folks in our communities about the desire they have to get healthier and the challenge of communicating that to partners or roommates that, I really want to take control of my health, or begin eating more whole foods, or stop watching TV so late into the night. And I can see that there's a place where preference meets desire, and it's probably good to determine just how big that feeling is. And then we talked about, I keep forgetting the third one. I must have a Freudian block. Limit.
Setting limits.
Setting limits. So give me an example of that might relate to people's health.
Food, right?
Yeah.
Like you can set a limit with food. If you have a partner and you maybe you guys cook together, you can have a limit and say, I am limiting my carbs or my gluten intake. So if your partner says, well, I want to have pasta 4 nights a week, you can compromise and get a gluten-free thing and maybe do it twice a week. It's your limit is what you are or aren't willing to do. And here's the thing. You don't have to do the same thing. Your partner can eat pasta every night if they like, and you can say, okay, I'm going to make a big salad tonight. That's what I'm going to be having. But only you know your limits, and I think that this can be difficult when a lot of us, women in particular, were raised to be people pleasers, as good girls, be nice, don't make waves. You don't want people thinking you're mean or bitchy. And it's almost like we've got it in our mind that if we prioritize the way we feel or what we want above what someone else wants, we're being selfish. So in not communicating those things, what ends up really happening and why it matters, like think about boundaries. Why does it matter? Because you can't be fully self-determined or self-determined at all in your life if you're not telling the truth about how you feel. So we got to be clear about what is our side of the street, right? Because it's not like the truth about, how some people will use, I'm just being honest, as like a big stick to beat you in the face with. Not that. Because that's like judgment, masked as honesty. Yeah. This is really about knowing ourselves. So not only were we not taught how to effectively establish and hold our boundaries, we were taught that it's rude and unfeminine to do so. And so, when clients come to me and they're like, I don't know, I feel like I'm weak, or why don't I know this, or why am I still in the same type of relationship? I'm not getting my needs met. I'm like, listen, look at boundaries as a language. And you would not expect to be fluent in any language that you had no instruction on and no one taught you anything about. You wouldn't feel bad and you wouldn't wish you were just going to get good at it. You would know that there were steps that you need to take. You can learn to do anything. And the way I felt like it was really important to write the book and the methodology, that it is all built on small steps. Because there's a lot of myths. We have all these fears that if I assert myself, if I set boundaries, I need to be mean, rejecting, confrontational, lots of conflict. No, is what people think it's about. It's not true. But when we really boil it down in our relationships, if you are saying yes when you really want to say no, under the guise of being perceived as being nice, it isn't actually nice, because what you're doing is you're literally giving the people in your life corrupted data about who you are, about how you feel, about what you want. And your preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers, those specifically are the things that actually make you uniquely and amazingly you. Just like your DNA, right? Like there's never before was anyone with your exact DNA. There never will be again. So this whole compare and despair or trying to be like others, there's something so self-abandoning about it. And how many of us were raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. I mean, pretty much everyone, and I've had women from 195 countries take my boundary course. And there was no country, no place that anyone ever said, oh yeah, my parents totally taught me how to do this. No.
That doesn't happen here.
No.
Nope. No. Yeah, and so often what I hear from people, in fact, just the other day, there was someone in my Healthy Dating at You group who was describing a scenario where a relative of hers had been institutionalized in like a rehab facility for a while. And when they came back into the home, their expectation was that they would be getting taken care of. And in fact, told her that they required this constant bedside care. And she began to notice that while that person had been gone, she had discovered a lot of very clear preferences, desires, and limits that she had never even bothered to explore for herself when she was living with this relative. And then when the relative came home, she suddenly realized, like, of course, she wants to help take care of this person, but she was running up against her own limits. And I think feeling the very strong need to set a different boundary than had previously been set because she just had nothing to compare it to. So no opportunity to review. And I'm thinking about that right now with regard to a post-COVID world where so many of us have been thrust into a reality that is somewhat different, the way we're living, than it was, say, last year. And
Yes.
maybe for the first time, we're discovering how much we prefer to live a bit differently than we were because now we're considering something different. Is navigating a boundary setting, for example, in an existing, let's say, living situation or work situation, it's always been this way. You've never stated a clear boundary up until now. You maybe didn't even know you had a preference. What is a way that we can go about broaching that conversation? What language would you suggest to someone who is confronting for the first time the desire or need to set a boundary with someone for whom it is likely to land as new news?
hmm Well, let's just expect that in an established relationship with an established boundary dance, that they're going to notice when you change your steps and that there will be some level of pushback. So if you expect that, you'll be less like we can't be super tender about making these changes. If you're someone who you can't stand it ever, if anyone is even slightly upset with you, this is going to be painful. So, right before we get into the process of boundary setting, because I give you all of these steps to make proactive boundary success plans, especially in established relationships, because we know the players. We kind of have the feeling of like how this person is going to take it, who's going to be more open. So you have to get yourself ready to do that. And before we do that, we do a whole thing about your boundary blueprint. So this is in your unconscious mind, right? I talk about a downloaded boundary blueprint, which is basically the paradigm that is in your unconscious mind right now, the way that oh my God, you were going to talk about that? The way you relate to boundaries. We learn this, right? In the families we grew up in, the homes, the parental impactors we had, country, culture, role in the family, experiences you had. Because if your family was chaotic or very disordered, addiction, abuse, anything like that, that also has a massive impact on whether you think you have a right to have boundaries. Because if you were a kid who was, let's say, parentified or young, so in a healthy family structure, it's child focused. I don't mean child obsessed. I just mean child focused, where if you have minor children, then what we do is organized around what's happening with the kid. In dysfunctional family systems, a lot of times, the identified patient, the identified whoever, addict could be. So now it's adult focused. And the kid, nobody tells us this. We just do it because we're so adaptive.
Yeah.
You know, if you need to take care of the parent, if their needs have to come first, you know that. And a lot of that was super adaptive. For you to know that, you avoided pain, maybe you avoided abuse in your childhood, just keeping the peace. But we don't know that when we become adults, that is now maladaptive in adulthood. And so as we discover all these things, I guide you through this process. Picture like we're going into the basement of your mind. I'm wearing like a miner's light. I'm holding your hand. Don't
Hold my
worry, you're
hand,
not
Terri.
alone. I'm holding your hand. We're finding boxes of information, and then we're bringing them up into the light. Because the whole book and all the things that I teach are based on these 5 pillars of self-mastery, which is self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-acceptance, that can be really hard, especially when it comes to childhood stuff. I can't tell you how many therapy clients have said, oh my God, that was 3 decades ago. I don't want to blame my parental impactors. I should be over it by now. What's wrong with me? I'm like, okay, we're not blaming them, but we need to accept what actually was, if we are to make any real transformation that's going to stick. Yeah. And then the 4th pillar is self-compassion. And then the 5th pillar is self-mastery, which includes self-love and self-celebration. So as we go through this process, I'm going to get back to what you're saying, language.
No, I'm fine.
But I wanted to say that when we excavate this information, you'll find that there are charged situations still from childhood. And those charged experiences will drive our adult behavior, our boundary decision-making in a way that we are unaware of. Mm-hmm. So this work that we do in the beginning of the book is important because you can't change what you're unaware of, right? You're like, but I feel afraid. When you understand that it's really the child within you who feels afraid, there are many things that we can do. We can honor that experience. So I don't know if I should get into no, I'm not going to. We're just going to stick with language. When you do all those things, I think the easiest way to start the process of being more, talking true more, as I like to call it, is people who are really bad with the auto yes. If like you're an insta yes person, when someone asks you something and you're like, sure, right then, right there. So my advice is that we never say yes right away. If you suffer from this, right? That we always buy time. So you have 3 or 4 phrases that you'll have at the ready of like, hey, all right, I'll get back to you on that. Let me get back to you on that. I need to check with my roommate, my friend, my partner, whomever. Sometimes you could just say, I have a 24-hour decision-making policy. I'll get back to you tomorrow. If you want to be kind of cheeky about it, but you should have a 24-hour decision-making policy because it is so much easier to say no when you haven't already said yes. Yeah. So that may sound small, but it can be revolutionary.
Yeah.
The expansion that can be created just from your knowledge that like, oh, I don't have to say yes to everything. Let me think about it. We feel this urgency and you know that something is going on inside of you. If you feel that urgency, like I have to, exactly, your heart is beating, you're like, I have to give them an answer. If it is not an emergency, the truth is you don't have to give them an answer. And even people who will come to me and be like, try to pressure me for an answer, like, well, if you want to do this, I need to know by 3:00 today. I'm like, well, then it's a no, because I don't make instant decisions. I mean, if the house is not on fire, like, and you're not like, hey, do you want to leave because the house is on fire? Yes, I do. That's an instant decision. Yeah. Generally speaking, poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency for me. Yeah. I need and want space to decide. So if we allow ourselves to be pressured, we end up spending a lot of time with people we'd rather not, doing a lot of things begrudgingly or canceling at the last minute. Because you ever just say yes to something that you're like, never am I doing that. I'm not going to that event. I'm not doing that thing. And so again, you become someone that if people can't trust your yes, they can't trust your no either, which means you're really not behaving as a trustworthy person and you're really abandoning yourself in the process of all of that. So that's the beginning of shifting, is just not automatically saying yes.
That's good counsel. Yeah. And I think that too often what I witness in the course of people's health transformation experiences is them making really great headway in their self-awareness around what works for them or what doesn't, in terms of food or movement or sleep or stress or self-care. And they start gaining this steam and feeling better. And then they run into these old systems where, sometimes it's quite overt, like, you're no fun anymore. You used to come out and do this stuff with us. Or sometimes it's like, well, I'm glad you're able to take such good care of yourself. There's that sarcastic thing. We aren't all so lucky. And eventually there's a pullback that happens, that's sort of a social chill effect, I guess,
Hmm.
in the world that I inhabit, which is healthy deviance. We talk about it as like social barriers to change, so social
Hmm.
and psychological barriers. But I think that so often they're invisible and they don't have this kind of language. And people themselves we don't have the language culturally to describe what's happening. We think
Hmm.
of all health change as like willpower, for example, when
Hmm.
often it is these like really subtle old experiences and patterns from our childhood. But we as individuals also don't have this kind of language to articulate our preferences in a gracious way, and powerful way that is
Hmm.
effective. We don't know how to, what I call, my term for it is renegotiating reality, where it's
Hmm.
like, I know it has been this way, and I'm preparing to change my reality. You're now on notice. And
Yeah.
there's ways of doing this in different environments. For example, at work may be very different than in an intimate relationship.
Hmm.
And you talk in the book about, let me get my reading glasses on, of several different types of boundaries, from, sexual boundaries, which are very important to health. Doesn't
Hmm.
make sense to be climbing into bed or doing things in sex world that you don't want to do, but also all sorts of other realms of self-care and time and money and possessions. What do you find right now is the area of boundaries where most people are having their biggest issues? I mean, I know that's a big generalization, but based on where we are right now, culturally, socially, and the pandemic in general, what do you think is the place where people are struggling the most often?
Well, right now and in the last year, I would say there's a lot of difficulty in asserting your truth if other people don't agree because we've been so polarized.
Mm.
So whether it's political, whether it's vaxxing, not vaxxing, whether it's masking, not masking. And so this really did bring boundaries and truth telling sort of to the front because I did a piece for the Boston Globe about this. It's not just like going to like a party that you don't want to go to, right? We're really talking about um, dangerous stuff
Yeah.
when people were like, it's really not a virus, that stuff,
Yeah.
and having some woman that I was helping in this thing was talking about her older father wanting to come see her kids, but the father refused to wear a mask, didn't believe whatever. And I was helping her with language to say, I'm telling you that if you want to see the kids, you have to wear a mask. And if you come to the house without a mask, they will stay behind the screen door and you will stay near your car and you can talk to them. But that's the truth, Dad. Like, I'm not, you have to get there,
Yeah.
not convincing them to change. It is so important. And this whole last year made this very evident of being very clear of what is your side of the street and what is not your side of the street. So whether her father believed in masking or not, whether he wanted to mask around other people, do your thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what affects me and my family.
Yeah.
And this is where it's at. And the father came and didn't wear a mask. And I was like, and you have to not let him in your house. Like,
Yeah.
actually. And she did. And, that is very scary. If you come from a patriarchal system or you had an authoritarian dad who you're still scared of, because that little kid doesn't suddenly not become scared, you're talking about having the courage. But she had kids and she was
Yeah.
like, I might not have been able to do it for myself, but I'm definitely doing it for the kids.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And I also think being locked down, a lot of people were in close quarters with folks that they probably spent 1 or 2 hours a day with, some people. And now they're spending 24 hours a day, not just with their partners, but also with kids and also with homeschooling and also all the things. And so I've done a bunch of videos and episodes of the Terri Cole Show about how do we create physical boundaries in the home. So you make signs to put on the door, make it fun with kids, but we have to have rules of engagement. So I really think that we have to have family meetings about how is it going to be. I mean, my husband, Vic and I, we've been married 20 something years, and he works in a studio outside, over there in a barn. And to come into the house, I put something on the door to tell him, If I'm live and it doesn't have to be super quiet, you can come in. But if it has to be super quiet, there's literally a red thing on the door that's like, do not enter. So if you have to go to the bathroom, go to Cumberland Farms. I don't know what to tell you, but don't come in.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I feel like maybe it's giving us an opportunity to do some boundary setting that, we do need to practice this set of skills and get better at it as a culture to pull this off. I think, I tend to take a kind of macro or meta version of it too, but I think we're living in a time where a lot of our social issues, right now, we have been having so much civil unrest and social disruption and political, as you mentioned, discussions, issues around race and culture and the patriarchy and climate change, each of which has its own kind of boundary conversation within it, boundaries that have been stepped on or stepped over or ignored, limits that we just live in complete denial of, and lack of awareness of how other people experience boundaries, for example. So I'm hoping that maybe if we become more fluent individually and more comfortable setting healthy boundaries for ourselves, we will also become better adapted to hearing other people's boundaries and experiences and really understanding those with more compassion. It's like everything's like I guess a Russian doll. There's kind of a concentric circle around all of it. But back to the point of your book currently, again, we're talking about Terri Cole's new book, Boundary Boss. And I like the subtitle of this very much, Terri, The Essential Guide to Talk True, Be Seen, and Finally Live Free. I want to talk a little bit about the live free piece. The talk true thing, I could not agree with you more. We have done a couple of episodes on conscious language and the power that resides in choosing your words to represent accurately and succinctly what you really want to say. And that is a form of manifestation as well. When we really clearly say, I choose this, I'm not doing this, I'm doing that. It's like it defines us. It makes us more real. Being seen, you mentioned as, if you don't show up with all of your real preferences and limits and deal breakers, people don't really know who you are. You're masquerading as another version of yourself. And then there's this finally live free piece. So on the living experiment, one of the fundamental principles we have is that if you choose to be a healthy person in our predominantly unhealthy world, you are going to need to do things differently than most people do them. And you're going to need to do things differently than most people expect you to do them. And there typically aren't a lot of models of people showing you how to do this in a comfortable way and have it like just taken for granted, that you might bring your own food or you might leave early or you might decline an invitation for various reasons. Living free, the term freedom, though, is something I think a lot of people don't right away associate with health. I do, because I think of health as the very first human freedom. If we lose our health, we go into the healthcare system, for example, and then you become kind of a ward of conventional healthcare. I mean, you're really turning your body over quite literally to the care of other people. As we were getting ready to come on live, you shared briefly an experience that you had in the medical system. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share that with our audience, because I think it's so emblematic of what happens and it relates specifically to this freedom piece.
I sure would. It's 20 something years ago now. I found a lump like in my throat. This is right after my father passed away suddenly. So I was very preoccupied with what I was doing. And I was actually at his house with my sisters in Florida, going through all of his stuff. And I called my mom and I was like, I have this weird bump in my throat. I don't know what this is. And she said, oh, we have like thyroid stuff in the family. It's probably a goiter. Just call your doctor. So I call the doctor when I get back, and I end up going to see a surgeon, and he ends up doing this quick. It's like a quick fine needle aspiration type of a thing. This what they came up with was neither. It was hurdle cells, which could be present in benign or malignant tumors. So this guy, this is the head of surgery in New York City at a place that calls themselves the best cancer care anywhere. And he basically said, listen, I wouldn't worry about it. But, if you want to do it, first he said I wouldn't worry about it. I'm like, okay, well, I don't even know what that means, but all right. And then he said, and if you decide in the next 5 minutes, I can do the surgery tomorrow.
Wow.
So I was only with my husband. Yeah, I was with Vic, my husband. We're there together. I go outside. I'm like, well, they can't tell me if it's conclusively anything because it was like a quick freeze that they do. So we didn't know anything conclusively. Anyway, long story short, I decided to do it because I was scared because I didn't know anything about cancer. So I do the surgery with very little conversation with him, very little prep, very little other than right then I went to go do the pre-test and then the next day I had it done. Besides having a terrible experience at the hospital, whatever. I mean, I was a vegetarian. They were trying to give me bacon. It was a whole thing. I was in a hallway for 9 hours, like after the surgery, like many, many things that were not the best. But then I go home with Vic to recoup for a period of time. I get no phone conversation, nobody. I figured whatever. So 10 days later, I'm going to just for him to look at the thing. I thought, like, this is what you're doing. So I go into his office and he has my chart, like literally has it on his desk. And he says to my face, I haven't even looked at the pathology yet. This is 10 days after the surgery. I was like, okay, great. We'll both be surprised. How about open it up and look at it now? But why even say that? Like, you wanted to make sure I knew you didn't give a shit crap? Like, I don't get it. Anyway,
Oh my God.
he opens it up and he was like, okay, well, it's malignant. And I was such a cancer virgin. I was like, is that the good one? Literally.
Oh,
And he was like,
that's the bad one.
not the good one. He was like, listen, I wouldn't even call it cancer. That's the
Oh,
next
this
thing he
is
said.
amazing. This guy's communication skills are
Yeah.
stellar.
He's just such a jerk. So I was like, well, you could call it like a hippo. I guess I don't care, but what does this actually mean to my health? And what do we do now? So anyway, we go through the process. Okay, you're going to do radiation. There are things that we now have to follow up and do. Sounds great. I say to Vic, when we're done with this process, which was all so not great, I say to Vic, I feel like something is wrong. Now, I physically felt fine, but my gut instinct was like, I think something's wrong. So I say, I go see a different doctor, but within the hospital system. And now this guy is so pissed that I'm going to an endocrinologist. He picks up the phone, a guy who could never get on the phone, who I'd say to his assistant, give me an endocrinologist in the hospital system. I'll go see them. And he's like, why do you want an endocrinologist? I was like, why do you care? This person's a specialist. You're a surgeon. Most of my clients don't. I was like, I don't care. So either give me the name or not. Okay. I go see the person. The person's like, okay, well, you definitely have something on the other side of the thyroid that we can see. So you're probably going to have this same surgery that you just had again. I was like, oh my God. She's like, but let's see. Well, you'll go get this thing done. So I go get this thing done where it's not a fine needle aspiration. Now they're taking a needle while you're wide awake, people. You're literally awake, no drugs. It's sonogram, right? Lead, but they're digging into your neck to try to get it was horrible. I was like, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown during this experience. Then when we get the information, they say, there was nothing there. I said to Vic, that's when I said, hey, I know that they didn't get whatever they were trying to get. I could tell you by how she was struggling. I don't think she got it. And I feel like something's wrong. So I go find another surgeon at another place in New York City. And I was like, I became an expert on this kind of cancer, what was going on. And so I see this surgeon and I said, hey, listen, here's, I'll tell you what happened, but you need to listen to the entire story. And if me having questions and me being knowledgeable is going to be a problem, then you can't, I want to do this. He's like, no, you're my favorite kind of patient. I was like, great. Long story, still longer, but I'm going to try to make it short. He says, okay, most people wouldn't do this. There's no medical reason for me to take out the other half of your thyroid. I said, but what about my gut instinct? He's like, oh yeah, we should definitely remove it because I trust your gut. And if you feel like we should do it, we should do it. I was like, okay, have the surgery. Now I'm following up with him. And I say to him, I walk into the door. I'm not a cancer virgin anymore. And I said, how's the pathology? He said, interesting. And I was like, because there's a malignancy on the other side. He said, not only is there a malignancy on the other side, it's a totally different kind of cancer. And in 38 years, I've never seen this. And this cancer could move to lungs and bones.
Oh boy. Wow.
radiation again. So I do the whole thing and I survive it. And I'm obviously okay because that was 22 years ago. But my whole point of that story and about boundaries was that I was raised to have this respect for medical professionals. I was raised to be a good girl. I was raised to really not question, not like blindly, but to just, well, this is the surgeon at the most famous cancer place in the world. Like, who should know?
Yeah.
Expert.
Yeah.
And what I learned, and my biggest takeaway, which really changed my life, was that my health is 100% my responsibility. And that, as mad as I was at that first guy, it was such a learning experience that I've never had another bad medical experience. Because from the beginning, I'm like, so this is who I am. This is what it is. That works for you, great. If not, see ya. Because I know that I could have amazing care with someone who resonates with me, has respect for me as an educated consumer, as like, you do not know what's happening for me more than I do. So anyone who's like, no, I think that's in your mind, like, no, always get a second opinion. I would never, ever do another surgery without getting a second opinion, which I did simply because I was young and I didn't know. I would never do that again. So anyway, boundaries, my preferences, my, I could have asked more questions. And I wouldn't have been in that situation, but I also wouldn't have learned. I probably wouldn't have become a boundary boss eventually had that not happened, because that was a big driving force of just getting over my need to please other people.
It's incredible how often I hear medical stories so along those lines of, I was afraid to ask the question. I could tell the doctor was getting irritated with me, so I just shut up. And it's interesting. I had a friend who recently was presented with that same kind of, like, you need to make, if you get this done right now, we can do it today. And like, everyone knows what a nightmare it is to like make the appointment and go back in and then go through all the. So she was given an elective surgery that was not medically necessary, but it was kind of related. I'm gonna plug my computer in here. That turned out to be quite painful and had long-term consequences, that she said if she had had a little bit more time to think about it and research it, she would never have done. And she'll, have the results of that surgery lived in her body, for the rest of her life. So it's one thing when we're talking about the medical system and, these kinds of life or death, or at least potentially disfiguring or damaging or scarring activities. But I think it's also a really good metaphor for what all boundaries are like, that there's these moments, the kind of characteristic qualities of a boundary experience, for me at least, are first that uncomfortable feeling you get where you're kind of you're on deck to make a decision or have to impose your preference or limit and deal breaker in the situation. And the first thing that comes up is this discomfort, like you said, of, I'm going to either make other people uncomfortable, someone's going to be mad, I'm going to disappoint someone. You talk in the book about all of that whole range of emotions. And then this moment of truth of, do I say something? If I say something, what do I say? And then how do I say it? So let's talk a little bit about the technology and some kind of, maybe framing it as kind of, maybe not so much do's and don'ts, but typical deliveries of boundary setting attempts and things that you have found work better. Because I think it's always really useful to give people kind of model language that might serve them.
Agreed. I think another thing in the beginning of this process, you may not have the wherewithal in that moment, but that's okay, because there's no statute of limitations. Like, I don't care if it happened last Tuesday or in 1978. I give you language in the book to be able to say, oh, hey, Bob, I thought you should know. Remember what happened in 1978? I want to tell you how I feel about that interaction we had at the beach. Like, you can just say it.
I love that.
Right, because Bob doesn't get to tell you that it's too late. And people will try to impose their own life rules onto you about, well, if you should have said it at the time. Oh, but I'm saying it now. So I'm literally saying it now. And especially with people that we care about, we can always start it positively. We can always do it with kindness, with ease. You can do it with spiciness and with fierceness if you need to. Right? If the person is pushing back or not listening. but we can always start it with love. So if someone is asking me to do something I don't want to do, I'll say, like a friend asked me to go to dinner with like her in-laws, who like it's hell for her. And I know she wanted me to like be a friend and go, but I was like, no, dude. And I just said, I'm always a yes to you. Gotta be a no for that dinner though. But I love you. So let's do lunch next week. Right? I'm always a yes to you. I'm telling her I love her, but I'm also not suffering through that terrible dinner because I don't want to. Unless she really asks, if she came back and said, really, I'm really in a low place, I really need your strength there, I probably would say yes. But my initial is to say, if someone asks me to do something and I really like them, I say, you know what, I love that you always think of me. Thank you so much. And actually, we already have plans on Sunday, but thank you for thinking of me. And I mean it. So when you think about that, you can start it in a positive way. And even if let's say you're changing the dance in an established relationship, and let's say you have a friend who always is the advice giver, whether you ask for it or not. We have these friends. Maybe we are these friends. And you're starting to want to make your own decisions. You want to be seen. You don't necessarily want to be a problem for this particular overfunctioning friend to fix all the time. That you can set them up to succeed though by saying, hey, I want to tell you about a situation, but I'm actually not seeking input or solutions right now. I really just want to tell you how I feel, and I would love it if you could just be with me right now, because I know, of course, listen, I'm going to figure it out. It's my life. I'm the only one who really can. But I just wanted to let you know. And if you don't do that up front and Uncle Bob starts to give you advice, perhaps on something you didn't ask, you can say, hey, wait one sec, Uncle Bob, I'm actually not looking for input right now on this. I was just sharing with you what's going on for me, but I'm not open to input. So we're not saying there's anything wrong with his input because we're on our side of the street, which is simply saying that is not my preference right now. And with the other friend, if they feel useful by giving you advice. I mean, I've had people just, in my courses, have a friend like flip out and be like, well, I can't be friends with you if I can't tell you what I honestly think.
Oh yeah. I heard that one.
Yes. And I would say to them, you can say, actually, we're talking about two different things. I'm asking you not to give me your unsolicited advice or criticism. I'm asking you to be with me. So what you're saying is that if I don't allow you to fix my problem, quote unquote, then we can't be friends. Is that what you're saying? Because that's what it sounds like to me. Or if the person's like, oh, so now you're like this, or I'm not good enough. People may have that response. You just stick to what is true for you. Say, not at all. I love you. That's not what I'm saying at all. This is not about you. What I'm saying is actually about me. And if you tell someone the way that you feel about something and they go, I don't understand that. You have no reason to feel that way. You stop them and say, hey, I'm actually just telling you how I feel, not asking you your opinion about how I feel. Because we're getting really clear in this process of becoming masterful that I don't need your effing permission to feel the way I feel. And I don't even need you to understand it in a relationship. So I'll tell you a quick little story about me and my husband, if that's all right, because it'll illustrate what I'm saying. When we used to live in Elizabeth, New Jersey, I moved from the city to be with Vic and the boys. I married a widower. He had 3 young, acting out teenage sons. It was amazing. Anyway, so I would take the train, and the train would be up top of this trestle thing. And I would always get out and look to see if he was already there. And if he was, I would be so happy. But if he wasn't there yet, I don't know why, I would feel like over the top, not happy, right? Like it didn't make sense to the situation. I knew it was a transference of some kind. I just didn't know what. But in the beginning, I wouldn't say anything. I would go down and maybe I'd have to stand there for 20 seconds before he'd pull up. And then I'd get in the car, but I'd be like mad. And he'd be like, how was your day? I was like, fine, I was tired. You know how we can be when they're like, is something wrong? You're like, I'm fine. I said, I'm fine. Where you're not that face. You're looking out the window like,
yeah, exactly. The coldest version of yourself. Yes.
And then I finally said to him by like the 3rd or 4th time, I said, I had this realization that when I get off the train, if I don't see you, I don't know why, but I almost feel like I could start crying. Like it doesn't make sense even to me, but I'd like to make a simple request that you just really work to get here so that when I get off the train, I can see you and be happy. He could have, he's a very mellow, awesome Pisces, and he's super understanding. So he was like, sure, of course. I mean, the guy's never late now, never. That was 24 years ago. But my point was, I couldn't even explain to him why that was my experience.
Yeah.
And I don't need to convince him that I have a right to my feelings. I wasn't making him wrong or inconsiderate because he was 22 seconds late, because that's barely even being late. But if you're going to be in my life, the way I feel, whether I understand it or not, needs to matter. Yeah. And when we're not making people wrong, when we're not going around blaming folks with using blaming language or guilting them, people are so much more open, I find, to want to understand how you're feeling. But it requires us to be vulnerable enough to say, because I mean, that was like a weird thing to say. Like, I feel like crying when you're not there. Like, that's a little bit weird. But I was like, I don't care though, because I don't want to be mad at him 5 out of 6 days a week. Like,
yes,
that started the night off where I was like pissy. Like, that's not fun, you know?
Yeah. No, that's so great. And it is so interesting, isn't it, how our relationship patterns are like that, that sometimes when we don't know the reason that we feel a certain way, we don't feel like we have any kind of legitimate right to have the preference. Like if it's not, my father used to always say, preference is not logical. And we used to just go roll our eyes at that. But I think he's right. There are a lot of times where we have preferences that maybe have their root in a childhood experience or some trauma that we haven't even identified, or just is the way it is. And this is how we like to have people show their love. It's our love language or whatever. And I think sometimes we get so stuck in our head about whether or not, it's okay or justified or what the other person is thinking. We kind of fail to deliver the truth of ourselves to other people who matter to us, that are like really significant primary relationships in our lives. Or we've had a bad experience in other cases. Maybe we've tried to get our needs met or our deal breakers respected and had losing experiences. This is another thing I want to talk to you about before we wrap up our conversation, because it's something I think is so many of us are maybe learning for the first time how to articulate and set and maintain healthy boundaries, that we're running up against each other in strange ways. Like what I learned is that I get to say this and you have to say this. And there's almost a technology of boundaries. I'm witnessing, for example, in a recent interaction with someone who is in my closer circles, but not like my personal friend, who kind of read me this treatise of the things that they had all these rights to, like I have a right to have my feelings and I have a right to have these things. And sort of implicitly, what I was taking away was like, what did I do to kind of bring this on, or like, do you want me to affirm that you do in fact have these rights? I agree. Right. You have these rights. Yeah. Good for you. And the way that you just landed that makes me feel like a little, what's it make me feel? But I ended up feeling kind of confronted in a not pleasant way. And then I felt like, hey, now I feel like my boundaries have been stepped on or stepped over. Like you don't necessarily get to just like text me this long list of things that lands without context. So if you're in a conversation with a friend, let's say, or a loved one, a partner, and you start out what you think is going to be a conversation that rapidly is escalating between my boundaries versus your boundaries, are there strategies for bringing that not necessarily to bringing the intensity down, because intensity isn't a bad thing, but navigating a circumstance where two people who are kind of new to boundary settings are both maybe coming with different, I've read this book and you've read this book and we have differing opinions. How do you have a conversation about boundaries with someone in a way that might help to have it go better?
Well, part of it is be aware that when you start having these realizations within yourself, you're going to have a lot of feelings of sadness, mourning all the time, maybe that you didn't talk true. There's can be an urgency, especially if you're leaning towards codependency, where like we want to just grab the bullhorn and be like, everybody, we need to talk. Like we just want to tell everybody that
people, we're going to have a conversation about boundaries out here. I need you on the asphalt at 7 a.m. sharp.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a new boundary sheriff in town, and it's almost like we want to warn them. And I've seen this, I want to say thousands of times in this progression of people becoming masterful at boundaries. And I always say, listen, that's just that you just want to discharge your anxiety right now. And that feels like it's going to do it. But what it's going to do is put the other person on alert, make them feel defensive, make them not want to respect what you're saying. So how we do it is our actions. The next right action, small, consistent actions. So if you're changing the dance within an established relationship, you may say, hey, I would really prefer it if we can choose together where we're going to eat. I know in the past, I've kind of been like, I'm easy breezy, you do whatever, because so many of us were raised to think that that was the way to be. No fuss, no muss, you know me, it's all good. Like, that's not possible. Like in life, it's not always all good, right? And a lot of times we just learn to have no preference so that we can, because our highest thing is to avoid conflict, right? So we want to avoid conflict more than we want to do anything, a lot of folks. And actually people can go take the boundary quiz. If you guys want to find out your own boundary style, you could be like the pushover, the peacekeeper, and you can go to, it's just boundaryquiz.com.
Okay.
Anyway, so how do you do it is you start one step at a time. And sometimes in a relationship where there's trust, where there's a willingness to kind of work together, instead of doing the old thing. So let's say that when you are angry, you express that in passive aggressive ways. That's how you show your displeasure. Like we were saying before, not answering one-word answers, or rolling your eyes, or heavy sighing, or being sarcastic, because perhaps being direct is too threatening. Instead of, so let's say you're a stonewaller. Usually you just stop talking to the person for a period of time to punish them, because this is all obviously super common. Instead of doing that in the beginning of this change, you can say, listen, I can feel right now that I want to do what I used to do. Just withdraw in anger and ignore you for 2 days. But actually, I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to take some time right now to cool off. And maybe if you're willing, come back maybe in an hour, have a cup of tea, and try to talk this out a little. Because I just know that I love you and that I don't want that pattern of me ignoring you for 2 days is just painful for both of us. And I don't want to do it. So I don't know what else to do right now, but I don't want to do that. So that's called the in-between, where you're going to hit this phase of your boundary development where you're too healthy to do the old things that you used to do because they don't really work, because now you're like, you know too much. Haven't yet mastered the new things. And so you're like, I'm in like the boundary limbo place. But sometimes just speaking the truth, just saying the thing. And even if you just notice that your person now has had a response or a reaction, I feel like what I'm witnessing is you seem upset. Can we talk about it? Like, rather than, you know how we just like, we intuit what's happening, but then we try to make it normal. Like we try to sweep it under the rug, and we try to just keep being like, do you want rice with dinner? Like trying to not have the conversation. And the more you talk true in a way that's okay for you, because listen, you're going to find the right way. Once you have all the scripts, once you understand your boundary blueprint, it is so much easier. The reason why I didn't just put out a book of scripts, because trust me, everyone in the world was like, please do it, I could have, is because without that internal work, without understanding what's happening with the child within you, which before I was a therapist, P.S., I didn't even believe in that work at all. I was like, it's too precious. What do you mean the child within? That's so weird. No, then I became a therapist, and I was like, oh my God, it's so real and so important. So you'll get it one next right action at a time. And I'll make a suggestion that you start with lower priority folks, send the food back if it's not what you ordered, get a quiet massage if that's what you're seeking. And I have scripts for all this in the book too, literally, about how to get a quiet massage. You don't want to say, hey, keep it down, chatty Kathy, right? Because you're like naked on the bed. But you could say, I can get to talking, but if I do, shush me because I need a quiet massage today. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Right?
Nice.
We're not blaming them. we're also not suffering through someone telling us their life story during a massage, you know?
Right. Right. I love that. Oh, it's so helpful. Yeah, and I'll say too, no matter how evolved we might fancy ourselves after years of therapy or coaching, there is
Mhm.
always going to be that as kind of a hierarchy of boundaries that need to be set. And
Yeah.
sometimes, we save the best for last because we are practicing. We're learning how to, in my work, it's like ask for what you want. And I really do agree. It helps to start by asking for what you want at a restaurant or someplace where you can walk out and be like, well, that was a disaster, but I did it one time successfully. Next time I'll do better. But it's like,
Yep.
then we're building up to having those conversations with our blood relatives and our partner or, our boss, where it helps to have some road under your wheels before you dive into the deep end. That's a mixed metaphor, but,
Yes.
get into the fast lane of the freeway. For folks who want to know more about your work, Terri, this is Terri Cole's new book, Boundary Boss, The Essential Guide to Talk True, Be Seen, and Finally Live Free. And she has an amazing website where you can get all sorts of cool information about the book. And tell people what else we want to know about this book. It just came out a couple of days ago, right, Terri? That's like the 20th, I think, was your
Yeah.
launch day.
Came out on Tuesday.
Congratulations. So excited.
I have a lot of bonuses that are still happening there. So if you buy it, you just put your little number in, the receipt number, and you'll get a bunch of things. I also have a gift, which is how to set boundaries with love. So it's a little video that I did for you and a beautiful downloadable guide. You can, answer a bunch of questions just to get a little bit more clear. And I also give you some scripts in that. So you can get that at boundaryboss.me/living experiment.
Okay, boundaryboss.me/living experiment. And I can pull off this sudden banner. Let's see if we can make this work.
Oh my gosh,
Boundaryboss.me/living experiment.
you're
I
so
did
fancy.
it.
Look at you, you tech genius,
Well,
you.
I am no tech genius. That is one of the, I was saying before Terri and I got on, I was like, one of the boundaries I'm going to start setting is like, I'll come talk to anybody. Just don't make me do the tech. If you want me to show
Yeah.
up, get a tech person because this stuff is harder than it looks. But I'm very
Oh my
happy I
gosh,
managed to make that work for you, Terri.
I love it.
Just for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I will add for folks, again, who are looking to live a healthier, happier life or choosing to live in ways that most people don't, experimenters, living experimenters, healthy
Mhm.
deviants, experienced lifers, whoever you are, know it is possible to create a life that really does suit you a whole lot better if you're willing to advocate for yourself in the ways that Terri here is talking about. I strongly recommend Terri's book is an excellent one. I intend to quote from it heavily in my Healthy Deviant group work where people are just now getting into the heavy lifting. We call it
I
raising
know.
your game. And these are the kinds of healthy living skill sets that are often overlooked in a world that loves to talk about diet and exercise. Let me
Mhm.
tell you, I would prefer to see you focus on learning how to set good boundaries because that's how you'll
Seriously.
build up enough, energy and vitality and resilience and enthusiasm and belief in your own worth to then go ask for the other things you want and create the reality you want around your food or your nutrition and your movement and sleep and social stuff, all of it.
Yes.
Congratulations on writing a beautiful book, Terri. I really love your work and I'm just delighted that you're sharing it with the world this way.
Aw. Thanks, Pilar. Thank you for having me. I so appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be in this group right now.
Oh, thank you. Well, we'll hear more from you soon, I hope. And in the meantime, folks who want to just check out the book in general, go to boundarybossbook.com. You can find out there's previews there and free bonuses for people who buy this book early. And then if you want to get in on the special gift that Terri mentioned for Living Experiment listeners, go to boundaryboss.me/living experiment. This episode of the Living Experiment, like so many others, will also be featured in our livingexperiment.com archive and come out on the Living Experiment feed within our real normal podcast. And in the meantime, it's just a
Mhm.
pleasure to get to join you live, Terri. Thanks for coming on the COVID edition,
Aw.
the Living
Thanks for having
Experiment.
me, my friend.
All right. Enjoy healthy boundary setting, everybody. Oh, hey, I almost forgot. One more
What?
thing.
Yeah.
We leave people with an experiment in each episode of the Living Experiment, a suggestion of something that they can do to bring this material to life in their own world. So I will offer one while you think of one, Terri, if that's
Mhm.
okay to offer our listeners. And I will suggest While so many people are working on renegotiating their Zoom-driven work reality or whatever your work reality is right now,
Mhm.
think of one person that you are currently in a good relationship with whom you can share this information with of just, I learned something new today about boundaries. I'm interested in if you've given any thought to the boundaries around this situation we're in now, work or think of it. But don't actually try to
Mhm.
set a boundary with this person necessarily.
Right.
Just share that you've learned this information and maybe turn
Mhm.
them on to whether it's this podcast or Terri's book and just see how that conversation goes and whether they too are interested in boundaries and maybe having a conversation about what they've been learning. That's my experiment for this
I
week.
love it.
Terri, do you have one?
Of course. My experiment is I'm going to ask you to do a list. You're going to search your mind of your primary relationships, so kind of the people in your front row, and see where you're feeling frustrated, resentment, unseen, taken advantage of, any of those things. And you're just going to make a list. And I promise you, if you look at that list, you will see that either a boundary has been crossed or a need is not being met. And that's a perfect place where you can start to at least know where you might want to be making small changes.
Beautiful. Well done. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much, Terri Cole. And everybody, happy experimenting, happy boundary setting. We'll see you next
Go
time.
do it. Yay.
Thanks.